Welcome everybody to our first real estate talk here in the Netherlands. Very happy that you all could make it here to the venue, but also a warm welcome to our digital guests, online guests. Yeah, we are very happy that you all join our discussion today, impulse speech and discussion today. So warm welcome. My name is Andreas Kiep. I'm from the Netherlands, Drees Sommer Netherlands Dutch office here. I'm responsible for the mixed-use developments, real estate, residential sector, and together with my colleagues, we are very happy to invite you guys here, also our panelists, but also impulse speakers, to our first discussion. Mixed-use buildings, mixed-use districts, I think a hot topic for all of us. So that means if it's a smaller city, it's a larger city, it's any kind of city, I think it should be discussed. So there is a lot of expertise, a lot of knowledge, a lot of know-how here in the room, also in the digital room, but also in this room here. So that's why this is a networking event. I think the overall goal is to share our knowledge, to discuss our thoughts, visions, strategies, and so on to this topic. This is the overall goal of this networking event of Drees Sommer here in the Netherlands. First, or just to introduce a little bit the agenda. First, we want to have now an impulse speech from Vishan Chakrabarti from New York. Then we start, or our moderator, I will hand over then to our moderator, Barry, and he will start the discussion with our panelists over here. Then in the mid of the of our panel discussion, we will have another impulse speech from Iran Chen from New York to a very interesting project in Rotterdam, a mixed-use project in Rotterdam, and then the second part is again with Barry, with our moderator. So yeah, if it's fine with you, I would say let's start. Let's do it. And I would like to say hello, maybe to New York. Vishan, are you there?
Hello, yes, I'm here.
Perfect, thank you, Vishan. Vishan, just a few words to you. You are the founder and creative director of Practice for Architecture and Urbanism, and author of the highly acclaimed book, A Country of Cities, a manifesto for an urban America. So that's why we invited him to share his thoughts with us about urban development. Vishan, if it's all right with you, the stage is yours.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Good afternoon or good morning from New York, or maybe I should call it New Amsterdam in this setting. And so I'm gonna just share my screen and maybe we can go from there. Okay, can you all see that? Yes, I think you can. Okay, so this talk is called, it's a short talk, and it's meant to just be a provocation for you. And I call it Mixed Use Futures in the Post-Pandemic City. And Andreas said, as architects and urbanists, and many of you in the real estate profession, we've been thinking about mixed use districts for a long time, especially since the writings of Jane Jacobs and others, many actually famous urbanists from your part of the world. And I think even before the pandemic, cities were changing largely because of technology. After World War II, we mainly built hub and spoke cities with this notion of a central business district. And then I think we saw emerge multiple districts where work was happening across the territory of the city. And I think increasingly, and especially with now hybrid and remote work, we see in the territory of the city many more places where people will work to form more of a lattice structure for our cities. And I think this has tremendous applications and implications for what we build, how we build, the infrastructure we build, and the society we create as a consequence. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this notion of the 15 or 20-minute city. The mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo, who's a kind of hero of mine, she's talked about this and is really implementing this across Paris, this notion that you should be able to get 80% or 85% of your daily needs in a 20-minute walk. So I think that applies to this notion of this lattice city that, if you are working in one of these nodes or living in one of these nodes, you can reach work, home, culture, recreation, and so forth in a fairly small distance, but still use the larger city for some of its larger pieces of infrastructure, the opera house, the park, the museum, the waterfront. So you're probably all familiar with that. I just wanted to set up a conversation about how buildings participate with that as an architect, and in terms of both their relationship to the city and particularly the public realm and the infrastructure around them as not just mixed-use districts, but potentially mixed-use buildings. So a little bit of my background, I worked for Mayor Bloomberg after 9/11. I was the director of planning for Manhattan. And a lot of the work that you see on the upper part of this slide, the rebuilding of the World Trade Center site, the creation of the High Line was done during that period. And I learned a tremendous amount about the mixed-use district and how the forces of architecture, design, communities, and real estate work together to create mixed-use districts, and then subsequently went back to architectural practice and built a lot of mixed-use districts, including in old heritage sites. That park on the lower right is the Domino Sugar Refinery, where I continue to work today. We did a master plan for a park that's been very successful there, and it's a very interesting mixed-use district, in the sense that it is, because it's built around heritage, is something that is very unique to the city and the place. It can't be a mixed-use district that can just be easily replicated around the world. And I think that's a very important feature architecturally for the future of mixed-use districts. So 7 years ago, I started my own office. It's in New York. It's actually in what I would argue what is kind of a mixed-use building, a building built as a warehouse, not as an architecture studio. But the building had the longevity to be able to transform into these various uses. And I wish we all thought about this more. How do we design buildings not just for the use that the real estate industry sees in the first 6 or 7 years, but actually in the long-term life of the building? I think it's very important in terms of sustainability, as well as the use of the building. I also think, especially, before the pandemic, but even now, so more so after the pandemic, that, in the United States, there was this mantra that many mayors used. They said, they'd run for office and they'd say, jobs, 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 that what we care about is jobs. And I think today's young people, I think human capital today, as people come out of university, they are looking for more than that. Of course, they are looking for an economy that works for them. But I like to talk about this triangle of jobs, justice, and joy. They are looking to live in places that they consider to be just and joyful, not just places that give them an economic livelihood. And so the undercurrent of jobs, justice, and joy is this notion of there's economy in our society, equity in our society, ecology in our society, and experience, which is something that we, of course, as architects think about a great deal. And so that's a lot of the work we try to do in our office. I still believe in the city, even in the post-pandemic circumstance. The building on the lower right is the new headquarters for JP Morgan Chase. That's a collaboration our office is doing with Norman Foster's office in Manhattan. That building's under construction. Domino, the sugar refinery, the upper right image is under construction. The lower right, the lower left is a 2,000 unit all affordable housing project in one of the poorest parts of the city. That's also just gone through approvals and is about to start construction. So I still believe in these mixed use districts, and I think they're very important. I've given talks about the fact that to build better mixed use districts, we really need to talk about affordability and ecology much more and find housing types that meet today's needs. This is a whole module I won't get into that's a carbon negative module for housing, about 3 stories, but still quite dense. that could be quite affordable and used in multiple places around the world. And then just in terms of the joy part, because I think the joy part gets not talked enough about. A project we have in the upper left, which is an expansion of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland, or the upper right, which is a new observation deck in Niagara Falls, a bridge that we're designing in Indianapolis. I think joy is a very important part of what keeps and attracts human capital to our cities. And then lastly, in terms of justice, I think one of the big issues we need to confront, I think Europe is doing a much better job of this than we are, which is a question of equity, not just in terms of the kind of standard measures we use for equity, like income or race or gender, but also our streets and street equity. That, you know, the images on the top row are New York as it exists today. A third of the city, a third of the real estate of New York City is still dominated by roads, which are then dominated by private vehicles. And I think we can imagine a different kind of city, which is the bottom row, which is a city for people. And again, I think Europe is much more advanced on this than we are, but we all have a way to go to make this transformation happen. And I think the real estate industry has a major role to play in understanding a future that is less car dependent. Okay, but now we are in this post-pandemic circumstance, and I just wanted to end with this notion, not just of mixed-use districts, but returning to this notion of a mixed-use building, and how can that be designed, not just in terms of new buildings, but existing buildings. So this is very fresh data that comes from a leading business organization in New York City, and I don't know how this would compare to where you are, but what you see on this graph is Manhattan office occupancy. The black is late October of last year. The gray is April of this year. The red is September of this year. And so what you see is that there's an increasing number of people who are coming to the office 3 days a week, and then it drops off on either side of that. And if about 55% of the people were working fully remote at the end of last year, that number's dropped to 16%. And so we are seeing our office space come back to life, but very few offices 5 days a week. My office is not there 5 days a week. We have a hybrid work schedule. I think most offices have a hybrid work schedule. And I think this is a diagram from my friend Carlo Ratti, a famous Italian professor who's at MIT, who talks about this notion of mixing within buildings, that the digital revolution actually enhances this notion of mixing within buildings. We've done a lot of studies about what it would take to create a mixed-use building from scratch. And what I mean by that is a building where you can imagine equally a family of four living next to a technology company, living next to a dentist's office. And what's interesting is our older cities provided these kinds of buildings and we thought nothing of it. But today, in today's financial markets, in the way we think about buildings, we think they have to be a hotel, they have to be a residential building. And what we found, and we did this at 3 different scales, a sort of small scale, a medium scale that even included some light manufacturing, and a larger scale that didn't include residential, but included a variety of different commercial and research uses. What we found in all cases is the difference are things that are, higher upfront investments in infrastructure, in higher ceiling heights, in, more sound insulation, more fire proofing between uses and so forth, which of course a developer is going to respond to by saying, well, that makes the building much more expensive to build in the first instance. But I would argue that for some of these uses, and especially like if you're a university or something, the long-term value of that building is so much greater because, like my architecture office, it can transform into many different things over its life cycle. And I think that's a tremendously important thing in terms of sustainability. And then the last thing I just wanted to close on is a little study we've been doing about the future of some of our most vacant office buildings in New York City. These are neither the fancy new buildings that you see at the World Trade Center site or Hudson Yards or other places where the occupancy rates are quite high, or in buildings like mine, which are the older buildings that have been converted and have light and air and remain quite popular. But the buildings that were built in the post-war period, in the heart of our central business district, these have the highest vacancy rates of any building typology in our city. And I bet that that is true in many cities around the world. They have low ceiling heights. This is Don Draper land. And so they're very hard to rent right now for office space. And we've been doing a whole study about residential conversion, and we found a couple of interesting things. That this would require a lot of surgery to these buildings, probably tax incentives, zoning changes, building code changes. But we are trying to talk to the city about adopting those changes, because we think that what this could do is bring mixed use life into our key central business district, Midtown Manhattan. It means trimming up the building, making the floor plates a little less deep, and then taking a typical floor and doing something very interesting with it, which is, if we have perimeter residential that is only about 10 meters deep, because that's how far natural light will infiltrate, that these office buildings are deeper than that, that what we can provide in the heart of these floor plates is home office space. So for those workers who are working 3 days a week in the office, but then maybe 2 days a week from home, sure, those of us who have larger residences, we can find, I'm speaking to you from my bedroom where I can carve out some space. But a lot of people, young people, people who are lower income, are really struggling with this issue in terms of working from home. And so what these buildings could provide is internal workspace that's either associated with the apartment or a shared workspace in the heart of these old office buildings. And so it does something that we think is very important, which is it takes the fact that there's a lot of empty existing office space and an enormous housing demand that we have in our city, and tries to marry those two. It will not be easy or cheap in the beginning, but I think over the life of the city that it'll be very important. And I believe in a world of climate change and social division that our cities are our last and best hope. So we have to continue to reinvest in them and renew them, even in the aftermath of this terrible pandemic. So thank you for listening. I hope that was interesting and a nice provocation for you to begin.
Thank you, Vishaan. Thank you very much. People are all applauding you. Thank you for sharing these thoughts. And I think you're going to stick around for a while and listen to our discussion and maybe have some input in that as well. We're here to talk on the invitation of Drees Sommer about the future of urban development, starting with user needs and requirements. We're talking about social, technical, and architectural perspectives. And I'd like to introduce our panel members, starting with the lady in the middle, Galina Permiakova. She is Director Real Estate Development for Patricia Netherlands, an investment company in real estate and infrastructure. On her left is Bart Meijer, CEO and founder of MRP and owner of the building where we are right now, the Amsterdam World Fashion Center. And on the right is Harris P+, urban design, planning and development. He works with Drees Sommer. Welcome to you. Let's give the lady the stage. If you listen to Vishaan, he is really talking about using what is already there. He was talking about heritage. He was talking about people who are living there. How do you look at that subject from your point of view?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me and having me here. And I guess it cannot be the most relevant period of time now when we see on the one hand big destruction of neighborhoods in one part of the world, and on the other hand we indeed face big challenges. How are we going to bring and how are we going to create those new cities? How do you combine the existing structures? How do you repurpose them? So we as Patricia, we are long-term we are investing on behalf of long-term investors, pension funds and insurance companies, and sustainability is one of the considerations that we take into account in our development processes. So when we approach the development projects, we obviously also look how can we preserve the structures that are already in place and give them the new functionality or the new meaning. it always requires, I would say, a dialogue between the municipality and the existing community, because there's a certain level of history attached, there's a certain level of emotion attached, and
What's the role of the developer in that,
and
in this dynamic relationship? It's not just the municipality and the people who are living there, right? The developers.
Exactly, and the developer has to understand how that structure, especially if it's a monumental or a listed structure, how can you, from a technical perspective, how can you give it a new meaning and introduce it and integrate it as part of a larger development. So, as an example. And we were talking about that with Harris, that's good to bring some examples. We are currently, as Patrizia, developing a 2,000 unit residential scheme in Berlin. It's a big neighborhood development, and as part of that, we have several, actually three listed buildings that we want to keep and retain and give them the new function. So we actually use them as the place to create new amenities and bring a community together, future community of the residents, but also the existing residents who live in the area.
You take them into account as well. You bring them in the process as well.
You need to bring them in a process themselves, because it's also one of the, I guess, social impact that you can make as a developer, as an investor. How do you use the existing structure and bring the community together?
Harris, I'll go to you. Yes, mixed use areas, and Drees and Sommer is really looking at it from the user's perspective. Can you expand a little on that, and especially when working in what I guess most work is done in existing cities? How do you go around that? How do you do this?
Thank you also for having me here with you today, and I was inspired by Vishan's input on, and I couldn't agree more that we did many mistakes in the 20th century. So we did design this monofunctional and non-pedestrian oriented city, and this proponents of the inclusive human-centered city like Jan Gehl and Carlos Moreno became apparently very famous, just preaching what we all somehow know, that the Homo sapiens live in a community, and we have to accommodate to this sort of biological reality. And on the other hand, we still have, maybe on the building scale, is sometimes almost easier to, and I remember the theories of Harbrechen and the Dutch, I would say, pioneers in the open building discourse, but I feel we are still not there yet on the neighborhood scale. And it's a scale that we somehow neglected in between having these static master plans on 20th century and then having focused on individual buildings. And in many countries where we work, we still lack integrated, constructive, holistic approaches to neighborhoods. And for example, what we realize is that obviously in most cities where we work, in Mannheim, in Athens, in other Swiss and German cities, there is enough knowledge, there's enough interest, there's enough funding, but projects somehow do not happen. So
how do you deal, for instance, when you are doing a project in an existing area? There are always going to be people who don't want it, right? Who are opposed to it, and how do you deal?
There's different levels of participation, right? The first one is to inform, in which is you do not allow the stakeholders to participate in the process, and this is what makes it dangerous. And the highest level of participation is co-creation, and it does make it more expensive. It does make it sometimes in the beginning look slow, but that's the way and how we work. So we really integrate the residents, the stakeholders, but also try to bridge these conflicts among the investor who has this particular interest and the visionary architect and the angry resident. So you have to kind of find ways, and we do use digital tools in these so-called city action labs, where we basically outsource the urban transformation production out of our office, and it happens in a neutral space, what we call the City Action Lab, and this is how you create an ownership.
You don't start with an existing plan, you actually bring in the people before that to talk about what is needed.
I
Is that
think
right?
we have to start in the early beginnings of a project. I mean, I've seen projects being planned for 12 years and then they fail, for example, in Switzerland because of a referendum. They're not accepted. So we have to start very early and understand ourselves as curators. And when the stakeholders understand it's about collective authorship, it's about their voices not only being heard, but also they're being the co-owners of the problems even in the process. This is where this kind of support grows.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to Bart, because the interesting thing is that you're probably here in the middle of this development of a mixed-use district, right?
Yes.
We're at the World Fashion Center, and this used to be on the outside of the city, right?
Yes, yeah. This was a building that was in 1968, the year of my birth, a long time ago. All the textile trade from Amsterdam was located in the heart of the city, next to the canals. And it became impossible for them. It sort of connects to what we just heard, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of everything. So they all pitched in, a few hundred of them. We have here someone who was even, Robert Jan, the director today, who was one of the families that were one of the initial founders of this building, and took all the textile trade here. If you look at the old pictures, there was nothing. It was just a green field, a pasture. And what you see, and I think that this is very interesting listening to both of you, is that here in the Netherlands, I think that our government has quite a long time ago already seen the importance of these types of developments. And what we see is that socially seen, these urban renewals, but to do it in a way which is inclusive, to do it in a way in which you provide for all levels of society. If properly done, it really lifts a neighborhood. This here, this area here is a very good example. It was a neighborhood which was very empty, a lot of offices, very little homes. If they were quite cheap. And what you see now is, and it's really the city of Amsterdam who has done this, who has decided to do this, to say, okay, we're going to now do exactly what we've been discussing. We will make highly ecological, sustainable homes. That's one. We've been doing it for the last, I can't even remember not doing it. Two, inclusive, so we have a mix of social, mid-rent, and free market type residential. We have all the services, talk about the 20-minute story, very close, because basically you go back to the old village, don't you? It's sort of a full 360 circle.
And if you look at heritage here, because there was nothing here, cows maybe on the pasture, but how
Correct.
do you go deal with that?
Well, all of New West was that. And basically this was a whole master planned city that they made after the war. And this is you have some lovely places. You have houses with a lot of green. They call it the garden cities. And so this is something that was conceived as a residential area in the West. And this was an office hub they did.
And so is there a mix taking place now?
Yes, because it went from mono to give you some idea, we will have a total of 3,000-4,000 homes here in a few blocks. Two, we have a lot of restaurants that are here. We have schools, we have architects, dentists, people from all walks of life working here. So yes, absolutely. And I believe that this is also the only way to really create a healthy, also commercially healthy city, because it means that your commercial services, your tenants, they have plenty of customers around. It means that people can work at home easy because all the conveniences are right there. So yes, absolutely.
One of the items here in Holland is, of course, that people are pushed out of Amsterdam, low-income people or even middle-income people, like police officers and people working in the hospitals, because they can't afford housing anymore. How can you reverse that development?
It's a good question. We won a tender 3 years ago from the municipality of Amsterdam. It's called Amst. And in Amst, the requirement of the municipality was to make at least 180 or 200 mid-rent apartments, very large, up to 160 square meters, just for this group of people.
Okay,
so
mid-rent, what are you talking about?
up to 900 and a bit euros, so it's rent controlled. And so yes, the municipality is doing this.
Yes.
People are, but this is a problem that has so many facets. One is that if the interest rates we had the last few years are out of this universe, you know, to be able to lend. So this also made for a distortion in the market.
Yes.
But here in the Netherlands...
Now there's a different development. So What will be the influence of that, do you think?
What it means is that the purchase market will have a lot of more difficulties, because now on the 300,000 home, your interest goes from 4 to 12,000 euros. That is an amount you cannot overcome or manage. So it will strengthen the rental market in turn.
Vishaan, are you still there? I'm not hearing anything.
Yes.
Good.
Yes?
Yes.
Ah, hi, there you are.
I confess to some multitasking, but yes, I am here.
You reappeared. That's great. How do you look at this? I think it's more or less the same in the United States, that rent is the interest has gone up, and so investing is becoming more difficult. You were talking about this development you're doing with also low rent and middle rent. I think you said.
Yes, most of
Yes.
them have all three
Yes, but
in them.
I'm asking Vishaan.
okay.
Sorry about that. Vishaan, but how do you look at that from the New York perspective?
Well, we have a massive housing crisis here. And to echo your conversation, we have a very significant housing crisis across many different income levels. So across our lowest income levels, and we have a crisis in our social housing, meaning our public housing. But also, and that's the lowest income housing we have, we obviously have a severe problem with the unhoused, what people call the homeless, because we do not have the same social safety net that you have in Europe. And then on top of that, we are now, and we've been experiencing for many years now, a crisis in what's called workforce housing, meaning firefighters, nurses, and so forth. I mean, the city of San Francisco is seriously concerned about the fact that many of the first responders who respond to emergencies after an earthquake or so forth cannot afford to live on the peninsula of San Francisco. So if a bridge is damaged during an earthquake, there's no way for those responders to actually respond to the scene. Okay. So these are, very, very significant problems we have. The project I showed you is a 2,000 unit, all affordable housing, mixing quite low income up to what you'd call workforce housing. But that project is a significant commute from the middle of the city. It's quite far out. And that's why I was talking about the conversion of some of these older office buildings in the heart of the city. When I talk to communities here, the need for housing is just tremendous. And what was said earlier about the interest rates, absolutely correct. This is going to be a crippling situation for people who are looking to build equity.
And Vishaan, let me ask you a question, please. But is the market able to do this, or do you need help from the government to build low price housing in America?
So the government has to take action. I mean, we've had a problem. So, I know many of you probably read about the politics in the United States with some amount of wonder, anger, and disdain. But, in the 1980s, we had a very politically united country. And in 1984, Ronald Reagan won almost every state in the country. And in 1986, he passed tax reform that basically created the developer-fueled mixed income housing that we have today. The government stepped out of the public housing market at that point. It went further under Bill Clinton to the point where it is almost impossible for the federal government to invest in public housing. And so it is all left up to the private marketplace, but with low interest bond financing that's applied to developers to build mixed income housing. There's nowhere near enough of it. And we also have the community pushback issues, even in some of our most progressive communities. People don't want to see more housing, don't want to see homeless shelters, and so forth. And so the government, I would argue, has to get much more involved, much more activist, because the financial markets simply don't have the patience, I think, to deal with the long-term needs that we have in terms of housing in our society.
I think that's a very important remark you're making, a true word. Let me get back to the panel, Vishaan. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, I would like
Galjana, yes, please. I was going to ask you, how do you look at this subject from your point of view as an investor? And
indeed, for us, social housing, mid-rental housing, it actually presents a diversification opportunity. It also presents a stable cash flow, because social housing, these tenants are very sticky. It's very predictable cash flow. Yes, it is regulated, but it also gives you certainty on how your business plan will look over the period of 10 years and further. Next to that, obviously for pension fund investors, it's the point of affordability is very important. But I guess there are a couple of points and aspects to be made as well. The government cannot leave everything to the market parties to solve it by themselves. So it's either should be some revision of the land policies across certain cities, so it should be adjusted, or the
What do you mean by that? Revision of land policy?
that the residual land value should be revisited, the way how we look at that. That there should be certain, let's say, I won't say discounts, but a certain
cheaper land for
exactly
for social housing. Okay.
Exactly, or the way the especially when we look at the larger neighborhood developments, the government should also take a responsibility in terms of infrastructural contributions, because that's also very often being put on the shoulders of developers. So I think there should be a division of roles and responsibilities, and understanding who is able to carry which burden, as well as I think there are a couple of examples also in the Netherlands. We are working on still in a very early phase in The Hague. We are working on a scheme where we have actually all types, the typologies of housing, mid-rental, free market, and social housing. I think it's also finding the right partners. We are partnering with social housing corporations, and I think that as a long-term investor, the partnership with the social housing corporation is actually another way of solving those challenges.
If you look at it from the point of Drees and Sommer, what do you think is the importance of social housing? Do you take that into account as well, or is it different in Germany or Switzerland?
Interesting question. Maybe an example from Berlin, and you all know about this rent cap that was highly controversial, discussed and implemented in Berlin. And there's also new types of thinking and new types of planning instruments that are being now evolved, because you had this, I would say, central government having more of the normative role, and then the local government having the regulatory function. And this is what this kind of neighborhood was in between these two. And now we realize that in Germany, there are somehow semi-public housing enterprises now hiring us to work on, to help them to understand the situation in these large-scale housing estates on the outskirts boards of West and East Berlin. That's interesting, from the 60s and 70s, that are highly monofunctional, highly residential, like sleeping towns, right? And many of them being on a high threat of hyper-gentrification, I call it. You can imagine there's 3 or 4 metro stops away from a Prenzlauer Berg or a Kreuzberg, where the rent is now half price compared to the city center. So there's a certain emergency situation that these neighborhoods do not become hyper-gentrified, so we curate the transformation process, and this is what we do. And
how do you do that? I mean, does it mean you can't develop a higher priced housing there? But how do you?
Of course. I mean, it's all about a mix. The first step is to understand what is there. And believe me or not, there is no data in terms of what's the social structures in the neighborhood, about the users. The data sets are not combined, about the building typologies, public space types, about what happened in the last 30 or 40 years. So we needed to make a status quo analysis, to visualize it, to bring it in a qualitative and a quantitative term, and then to present it to the client to say, hey, this is what you have now. And from here on, then we decide together whether this is going to be a conversion, an adaptation. You need a flexible master plan. So we are inventing also the planning instruments on the way, because this was, again, a kind of a neglected, unwished hot potato for many, but now they realize that some of these neighborhoods are becoming social hotspots.
But we're talking, I think you said, about one-use areas. So are you only talking about diversification in rents, or are you also diversifying in different ways there?
Sure.
Mixed use.
Sure. I feel
Can you give an example?
Very often we work a lot in public space because also public space is monofunctional as well. So so-called Abstandsgrün, how we say in German, so in between green, right? And public space is also proposed by Jan Gehl and by the 15-minute and 20-minute city is the central spine of developing an inclusive city. So it's not only about the buildings that obviously need to become multifunctional, and we have also similar examples that we were showing in New York, but it's about public space as well, and it's about bringing also microeconomies back, because if you go to these neighborhoods, you have supermarkets or nail shops and all these type of low level of services. So it's all about also introducing new ways of work and new ways of social innovation in it. So
What are you thinking about then? If you say new ways of work, is it like these working spaces where people who live can go out and work outside of their house, or what is it?
Sure, I mean,
What are you talking about?
Sure, I mean, there is different infrastructure that you can create. I mean, I don't mean introducing these kind of co-working spaces for the yuppies of, that move from Williamsburg to Shoreditch and to Berlin and back. It's and this is very interesting how you have these different, migrant population and the hipsters and the less and more conservative ones kind of be mixed in these city labs that we organize. And this is where, it's not so much clash as one thinks it's happening. So the similarities are obvious. So people want high quality living space, they want good public space, and then it's all about sort of discussion which acupunctural new functions can be inserted, because there's many also empty buildings, so they can be converted like this one here where we sit.
If I may add,
Yes, please.
I think also in the Netherlands or in Europe in general, we still have a very limited history with high rises, and how do we combine all those different type of housing, different type of demographics within one building. And I think as an architect, and I would refer here to our speaker as well, there's a lot to be solved of these frictions through architecture. How do you make sure that it's great from a, let's say, from Excel perspective or from a business plan perspective to mix that all, but how will it operationally function, especially as a long-term investor? You need to look at the operational side of things, and I guess there is now kind of a very big transformation happening in the way how we manage the buildings. It's really more human or people-centric approach. For example, in one of our properties, we now consider introducing not only a property manager who traditionally manages the bills and sends the invoices at the end of the month, but we also do have a facility manager, because it's a person who has to make sure that all those functions,
Like
which are
concierge, right?
exactly that all those functions that are stackled together, that they function properly. And then you have also someone who is called event manager, a person who actually has to engage and interact that community. Why it's so important to have that event manager? It obviously comes with a certain operational burden or cost, let's say, to the landlord and to the tenant. But it's important for to ensure that on the point of joy, that the tenants stay there, and the occupancy rate remains high. That there is also a certain level of community, because it actually that what creates the value on the long term.
Yeah.
So I think operational side becomes even more important.
That's important, this event. But how do you create joy for the people who live in the areas you develop?
I think one thing that we've not spoken about a lot today, but what I think, if you look at the successful, because I think a successful mixed use also starts with the urban planning. And if you look in the Netherlands, where we've been very at the forefront, I would say, of the urban planning part of this, that we have a lot of very good examples where also a proper urban planning, meaning what type of people will live there, what are the functions, what is this whole self-sustaining 20-minute business, is something that will only work if you tick all the boxes. There's a lot of examples that it doesn't work, where basically they put just the mixed use in an old industrial area, and it's hell. It's not cutting it. If you look here in Amsterdam West, This has been a process of 20 years. But if you now look, compare Amsterdam West, there's a lot of people with a migrant background living there. This is a beautiful part of the city. It looks better maybe than the much more affluent parts because everything is new, sustainable, the urban planning is up to date. And so I think it really begins with saying, okay, how does this mixed use, what is the surrounding? How is the infrastructure? What is the goal here? And I think that if you look at what was achieved here in Netherlands, also in The Hague, very successfully, and then you start comparing that to other countries. Take Borgerhout in Belgium, for example. You cannot even compare it to what you have here in Amsterdam. So to me, urban planning is the first.
That's an interesting point, but you also see in the Netherlands a lot of areas which are not very pleasant because they are too monofunctional.
Exactly.
So how do you think about organic development, which means bringing people into an area before you start building buildings, so you can develop more like an atmosphere?
I think that people always choose for them. You know, it's a natural thing that happens. So I think you need the foundations to build this, and the foundations are the services you have and are the location you have. But in a sense, it's always.
Do you agree with that, Harris?
I mean, it's a subjective thing. I mean, many of these residents, for one, it would look like an ugly 1970s housing block. For them, it's their home. So it's all about this identity aspect as well. You know, as soft as it sounds, that's very important. And this, if you neglect that, and obviously different of these target groups that I mentioned have different understandings of the same space. This is where the conflict actually starts. So, but I really believe it's about sort of this identity, and this is why the 15-minute community became so kind of popular. Basically.
But you can't think of everything on the drawing table, right? You can't plan everything, or do you think you can plan everything?
Many urban planners thought they can, and I think this is many of these neighborhoods that you mentioned we created that way. And I mean, for us, I don't also think it's only a design task. I mean, we have sociologists, psychologists, biodiversity experts in our team, and I think this helps us to at least have all these different perspectives understood.
And Galjan, I think we've got our second speaker in a few minutes, but...
I just wanted to add that I think it's important, to your point, Bart, it's important to have a clear framework. It's important to understand what the vision is of the city and of the planners. But I guess it's also crucial to leave a room for experiment and a trial and error. We do have with our team, we are participating in a development, one of the largest waterfront developments in Europe in Haven City, which has 20 years ago put a master plan in place, but also set very ambitious sustainability goals. And what they've seen that actually innovation and technology are just running much faster than the written master plan. And so that has been revised 10 years later. Or another example, we are working on a project in The Hague where the city has conceived a very good document about how the high-rise buildings should look like, how the functions should be stapled. But when you start working with that document, you sometimes, to the point of how do you mix the housing, you sometimes realize, well, actually the floor plate is not very efficient, doesn't fit within that diameter. You have to provide some level of flexibility. And I think that that's maybe to the point, what can we do better, what can we do change? I think the dialogue between the developers, investors, and the city planners has to be there. And I mean, it's great to bring the public into that, but I think there also should be professionals and experts who have to have that discussion.
We are going to our next keynote. I'm going to introduce him now. He's one of the most prolific architects in New York. His work is known around the world, and one of the recent projects of his architectural film ODA is the renovation of the former post office in New York, a new mixed-use high-rise project for the developer Omnam Group with project management by Drees Sommer. Ladies and gentlemen, I bring you Iran Chen. And I hope he's there.
Yes.
He is.
Welcome. I'm here. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hi, morning.
Thank you so much for having me.
Please, you can start your you can start inspiring us, Aaron.
Oh, okay. Well, first of all, I'm coming to you live from New York City. There's some background noise of construction. So this is our life here. I hope that it's not too distracting. I'm going to share my screen. Tell me if you can see it. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, great. So maybe I would say I live in New York City. My office, I opened my office here in New York City 15 years ago. And since then, we had a mixed bag of interest on different scale and different typologies of buildings. And about 10 years ago, sorry, about 5 years ago, at the end of 10 years, we came up with a book called Unboxing New York. And that book was really about how we treat the individual buildings in the limitation of New York City to push and pull and increase or expand the life experiences within the buildings for people. We've done all these models, designing buildings from inside out, talking a lot about indoor-outdoor spaces, but mostly and most importantly, how the building serves not just as a function for living, but as building serves as the experience and joy of living, if you will. And this type of typologies led to many projects, 15 Union Square West, if you've been in Union Square lately, the old Tiffany's building with penthouses above, or 100 Norfolk, a building where we pushed most of the floor area to the top to increase the roof and also the exposure to light and air, and 98 Front, a building with the porosity to bring 70% of the units with a substantial furnishable outdoor space, and kind of claim the in-between territory of 420 Kent on the River of Williamsburg in a sort of a larger scale, and many other projects across the country and across the world. But about 5 years ago, we've expanded our interest into the public realm. And we started asking the obvious questions, like what's the contribution of every building to the public realm? How a collective of buildings talk to each other to improve the experience at the street, the city block, the neighborhood. And what we've discovered was that similar principles that we apply to the individual building, the idea of expansion, the idea of indoor-outdoor, and the idea of creating experiences and not just function, has a powerful impact on elements that we try to address, and you guys were all talking about: inequality, accessibility, diversity, and mostly excitement in the street. So that led into a slew of projects on an urban scale. We have limited time, so what I wanted to do is kind of share with you 3 projects. But before I do, I want to say something about why this thing is important, where my motivation lies. And as we know, our behavior has radically changed with technology at the tip of our fingers. We have access to everything from services to merchandise, food, education, culture. We can even go to the doctor and get healthcare remotely, which makes all of the world surrounding us sort of come to us. And the very essence of the collective in cities was based on the fact that those services were given to us on the street level, that we've met our neighbors at the street on the way to get some of these services. So the question is, what is the new theme that would drive excitement at the street? And can we apply similar logic to what the technological world is doing to get our excitement in the physical world? And so I want to share sort of these 3 projects, from large to small and large again. Innovation Queens is a master plan that we've been working on the past 3 years for Silverstein and other big clients in New York. It consists on essentially 5 city blocks in Queens. Now, as you can see, currently, most of those are parking lots or old single-story, mostly empty manufacturing buildings, and the streets, or the grid, the New York City grid here, is extremely long. Every block, every street is almost 600 feet in length. So what we've done essentially say, what would happen if we take a quarter of the private land and give it back to the city as public space? A quarter of the private. You can imagine when I came to Silverstein's office the first time with that idea, what their response was. But as we process this idea, these would be a sequence of pedestrian-dominated areas in different scales with different program. And then the ground floor program, unlike the typical development that lets the market forces dictate what would be rented and for how much, we will actually orchestrate the ground floor based on logic that combines cultural program, community facility program, as well as local and affordable retail, which would allow this to become a resource for the entire neighborhood. All of them supports the outdoor space and create a sort of a sustainable community, not only environmentally, but also in terms of its social sustainability and economical sustainability, to sort of allow local businesses to flourish in an area that is catered to a much more wide range of people. Now, here is the beauty in all of this is we did not lose a single floor area for development. In fact, you know, we kept the development rights vertically and designed a building according to our philosophy as well, creating this kind of dynamic win-win situation where you transfer floor area from the bottom where the public need it and move it to the top where the developer need it. Essentially, this led to a sequence of urban studies. This is the main park where originally they thought of putting the main building and tower. It's supported by a cultural institution, which is a community hub, non-for-profit that would be open to not only kids, but after school programs, as well as these kind of alleyways that are less typical for New York City, but allow for pedestrian connections, and then covered markets that could be transformed throughout the year, adults gardens surrounded by libraries and other after school education, as well as energetic sort of courtyards with open food halls and makers spaces, etc. So the project was approved by the City Planning Commission about 2 weeks ago, and it's a big deal for New York to have a narrative that is unlike the typical narrative for urban design. I want to kind of jump into a smaller scale with Denizen Bushwick. And I don't know if you know, Bushwick is a neighborhood next to Williamsburg in Brooklyn. It's been talked about a lot. It's the up and coming area, the next stop at the train. And we've been asked to actually introduce a fairly large 2-city block residential development at the heart of it. And you know, the dilemma again was if you follow the New York City zoning, you essentially have 2 donut buildings across with a city, what's called a street wall. And we said, can we create some of the qualities you'll find maybe in a European city, the essence of discovery, the pedestrian-dominated circulation, and overlap the two as an idea, which resulted essentially in a series of 6 interconnected courtyards where the housing is orchestrated around it. The main street that connects the two was then converted from a street to a park, a public park, that has links into each one of those courtyards. So that there's a spillover between the park and those courtyards. What you see here is half of the project under construction. The entire thing was kind of completed a few years ago. So these courtyards were highly orchestrated, not only in terms of their landscape and their architecture, but also in terms of the program at the ground floor, creating a sequence of pedestrian excitement that leads from indoor to outdoor to indoor to outdoor again. And then art. Art became an essential part of the design. We've basically reached out to 13 artists, local artists from Brooklyn, to create these mega murals in and around the buildings. And those murals were hand painted by those locals, have created a super engagement for the community at large, and clearly the biggest public art collection maybe in Brooklyn. the nature of the spaces at the ground floor are always indoor-outdoor. So in any enclosed space, there's an engagement to the outdoor, and then the roof became a 6,000 square meter amazing park for the tenants of the buildings itself, a full range of community activities that is not only functional, but very much fun. Now, what we've learned from this project expanded to many of our projects, but I want to lend this in your neck of the woods, our project in Rotterdam. The post contour is under construction right now, but I want to kind of explain that in this, these are all of our collaborators. Drees Sommer runs the project, so Nam is the client, Ebite and Baxman Rose, the local architects, as well as Kimpton is the hotel chain, and Pieter is the structural engineer. As you know, the city was bombed to the ground, World War II, and these three institutions were left as a national monument: the City Hall, the Post Office building, and a World Trade Center. And clearly the city had a dilemma. You either transfer this building into some sort of a museum, but at the same time, they wanted to bring more density into downtown. And so, as you know, along Coulsingale, basically there's a sequence of new high density kind of towers that are coming in. Yet, Coulsingale Boulevard, and before it was renovated, and hopefully now in the future will be better, instead of a connector, was a bit of a divider between very vibrant neighborhoods. You know, you've got the train station, the Rotterdam Centraal, with the activities and the restaurants and the stores there. And then on the other side, the Rotterdam Black that actually had a lot of street activities, but because of the nature of the post contour as being kind of a fortress-like building, that urban connection was kind of maybe disconnected. Our idea was to transfer a building that was served by service on the back and people at the front. And in one hand, kind of respect the heritage or the heritage of that building, its history and its architecture intact, but at the same time, bring a new life of excitement to it, and maybe use the elements of connectivity, porosity, and density to create the placemaking that belongs to the city at large. How would that kind of be conceived? Well, if we connect the two courtyards and open them up 24/7 as a public space, then Rotterdam at the back and the Museum of Rotterdam and the new building by OMA would maybe have a new front to Coulsingale, and maybe that sequence of two internal courtyards will become an active, welcoming and open to all type of public space that would knit, or be one of the elements that would knit those sort of neighborhoods together. In a very practical manner, through a very long process of discussions with all city agencies, we eventually concluded to make way for a new tower by removing the west wing, which was a sort of a later addition to the original building and its foundation, and essentially create these kind of two pockets of public spaces that will be connected. And then to build a tower on top of it, we had to conceive of a bridge-like megastructure that is situated in this courtyard, but untouched from the historical context of the wall, and build a residential and hotel tower on top of it, creating a mixed-use project. We've got retail at the ground floor, we've got event space, five-star hotel, and a residential building, all united at the continuous ground floor, and then transformation through preservation of the old Grand Hall into a more vibrant meeting space, if you will, with small shops, F&B, and then connecting it through the building itself to what's now sort of a blocked courtyard into another vibrant courtyard that is more linked into the hotel restaurants, the residential entrances, a gallery, and additional food and beverage elements that cater outside into the streets, to the terraces. So just some images of the conceived transformation. Here you see the Rodezan wing on the right, the existing condition, well, not any longer. The west wing is already down. And then the proposed tower, the way it lends, respecting its architecture, the tradition, the rhythm, as well as the materiality of the old building in a modern way, and creating a new entrance from Rodezan. The tower itself, again, with sort of our commitment to active and humanize tall buildings, is consistent of double skin with diversity of outdoor terraces for different type of apartments. Also inspired by its adjacent buildings, the modernist expression tilt on its head vertically, right here, as well as the details from City Hall, as they articulate the arches and the church, as they articulate the arches that are hidden behind the vertical rain screen, allowing this type of life to occur while maintaining some principles of sustainability, including confusing of the wind, collecting rainwater, etc. This transformation extends to the interiors, and I think it's very important for us, at least, that the urban design ideas, the building ideas, and the interior ideas unite. This is clearly the existing. The existing is also landmarked, and so we had to work with the preservation committees to give new life and glory to the existing tile work and the spaces and their hierarchy by which they were conceived and designed. This will be the new entrance. From the new entrance, you'll go into the kind of the lounge and bar, which would also be the reception. And on the right side, you'll connect back into that newly created and newly formed courtyard, as you see. So there's a continuous loop of indoor, public, semi-public spaces. I just want to finish, I hope I didn't take too long, with maybe a thought that modernism was pretty much formed by the idea of form follows function. And, function is also program, function is also services, and perhaps, the new ideas that we should kind of continue and explore is form follows fun, in a way to say the experience that is catered to a wider range of people, the expansion of the public realm becomes as important, if not more important, than the functions that we provide, and that perhaps would lead us to better cities in the future. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Iran. It's great that there's so much joy and fun coming from New York today. I mean, the first speaker, Vishaan, was talking about the need for joy in an area. This is a great paraphrase of the original statement, form follows fun. I love it. Thank you very much. One question before I go to the panel. Is this plan for the post office in Rotterdam already approved of? Can it happen?
Oh,
or
yes.
Still in
the plan was approved about 1.5 years ago. The construction is well on their way.
Okay.
Right now, the entire west wing was demolished. The foundations now are being poured. And we're expecting completion in about 3 years.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. Will you be able to stick around for a bit while we talk to our panel? That's
Absolutely.
great.
I'm here for you.
I love your background, by the way.
Thank you. Forms follows fun.
Yeah. So, people, we need form follows fun. That's a nice note to have a discussion. Let's go to Bart first. If you permit me saying so, I think this building is very much a building which is probably, well, not exciting, but a lot of things happening during the day. But after 6 o'clock, it just dies down, right? How do you look at fun in this building?
I can tell you, so this has to do with the history here, because the building was in a green pasture, basically. So people went somewhere else.
The fun was outside with the cows.
Yes, and one of the reasons why the municipality is so keen on us redeveloping this building is just because of that. Because after 6, 7, 8 in the evening, we have a few places, but it's essentially dead. And this is when I talk about the urban planning, that if you do these things in isolation, they don't tend to work. So basically, what we'll do here, we have a mall, which is a B2B mall, basically. And there we will gradually, we have a supermarket, which is now coming, add functions for the neighborhood as the neighborhood grows. So that's the only way to do that, is to open up the plinth building, make sure you have light. The light is very important. The street here is very fast traffic. This is another hindrance, of course, for so the municipality is now creating all needed on the street level, on the urban level, and what we must do here, and we're very busy with it, is a hotel, with a fashion team, several restaurants, services like a dentist, we have them already, a hairdresser, etc. So it's really making sure you come back to the 20-minute story.
Yes.
Making sure that you put in all these functions and that they match the people that live in your area.
Yep. Is it easy for you, Galina, to introduce fun in your developments?
I mean, it's always a challenge to understand what fun means for one person and what it means for the other person. And we've seen that something that can be fun for one also evolves over time. I don't want to make the process very let's say, research-based, but I think it's important to understand the specificities of the micro-location and understand the demands of the current residents, but also how it's likely to change over time. And so we do a combination of things within our team. We have developed over the last years based on a data. We manage more than 56 billion assets under management across various markets in Europe. So there is a lot of data in-house. We've collected that data and put into artificial intelligence, I would say, tool that has many data points and that analyzes actually the location based on and gives it a score based on the available amenities in the areas. So that's to the point. How do we prevent that we are not replicating the same fun?
Is artificial intelligence capable of creating fun?
No, that enables us to understand the location, to understand what is already available in the location, and how we as a developer and an investor can add extra value, not to repeat or replicate the same amenities that are already in there. So so we use this tool as to understand what's already in the area, and as we design the process, we have upgraded that and call it amenities magnet dynamic tool, which looks because the neighborhood development is a process of 5 to 15 years, and so some parties are already further away, and some added already that fun. So we also try to understand how it's changing and evolving over time. We do have a Patrizia Art Lab Academy to a point that it's important to kind of innovate, and we want to bring our street artists in our projects to create that type of fun to the project.
If I can ask Harris about that, what you've seen in the last 10 or 20 years often is, of course, that artists have come to an area and they created their own community, and then the developers came in. I'm sketching a very black and white picture, of course. Developers came in, said thank you very much, took over the area, made everything so expensive, so they had to move out again, go to a different area, and the same process started again. Is it still the same now? How do you look at this subject in connection with fun? I mean, don't send the fun away, right?
I mean, this building doesn't look to me like people want to go home at 6 o'clock. I mean, let's see at 6 o'clock. I think it's about, I mean, what Richard Florida predicted 20, 25 years ago is that this is going to happen, right? As soon as industry moves out from Detroit to Mexico or to China, then you have empty space, and then what do you do? And obviously, a decay happens at the first step, and then all these creatives move in, make a place vibrant, and then they become the victim of their own success, of their own fun. And then they
Gentrification kicks in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I feel now we learned our mistakes in the last 20 or 30 years, that these processes can be curated in a better way. And that's what Detroit also, I mean, there's colleagues from New York know it much better, learn to work with these existing creative art and other industries that moved in there, not just
And how do you do that with your developments, with your
we tried to map it out. I mean, I remember the project in Athens already almost 10 years ago, where we mapped out 800 empty shops just in the city center of Athens. So you have to understand what is there, and then to provide space. This is connected to the last question that you asked me. And I'm very happy to hear that I would say the real estate and construction industry is moving towards being more acceptable for social and ecological solutions. This is different than 20, 25 years ago. So the S in the ESG, etc. And I feel this is a paradigm shift that we have to use now.
Yeah. These people you already mentioned are talking about ecologically. Ecology is very important, of course, because if it's not important, we won't have a world to live on. If you look at these developments, how do, especially now with the actual situation, the war going on, energy being getting more and more scarce, so the theme becomes more and more important. How do you connect these climate questions to developments where, for instance, when you develop high-rise buildings, it's very difficult to get them, to make them circular, to make them CO2 neutral. It's very difficult. Galina, can you say something about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a challenge for everybody in the industry, and I think we have a very ambitious goals, all of us. Until 2040, we have to be in net zero carbon, and when we look at our developments, indeed, materials. The choice of a material has a huge impact. 50% of CO2 emissions come from the building industry, of which we could say 20%.
It's literally eating the earth away,
Exactly.
with the concrete and the iron.
And indeed, so here comes the also point of innovation. And on one of our projects, we have introduced in a haven city in Hamburg. We are working with architect and engineering firm Werner Solbeck, and also with Drees Sommer, where we have developed two specific sustainability driven concepts. One of them is called gradient concrete. So it's a special structure of a porous, I would call it Swiss cheese kind of construction material, where you use actually less material, so you reduce the weight, and by that you will reduce the 50% material usage, but also the energy usage. And secondly, with Drees and Sommer, we have developed a cradle-to-cradle concept. So we look exactly how do we coming to the point of fun or health. You also need to consider healthy aspect. So how do you use the healthy materials that can be dismantled, recycled later once the building has kind of reached its life cycle. So I think it's a combination. On one hand, as a developer and constructions and the investor, you can look at that, but also construction industry plays an important role, because at the end, someone has to execute this complex technology.
There are many conflicting issues there. Right? If you want to have a circular building, you can't really have solar panels on top of it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
If you want to have a healthy building, you can't close it to keep the heat in. So there are many conflicting issues there, right?
Yeah, and I think it's we cannot score on everything 100%, and therefore was one of our projects where social so that part is an example of E, how we introduce E, but social impact that we want to make on communities becomes more and more important, and we cannot score on that 100% everywhere. So we have developed with our partners Good Economy special framework on how can we make impact on a community, for example, on a Berlin development, 2,000 unit I would say rejuvenation of an industrial site, how can you make an impact? So we've created a framework during construction phase, but also how can you manage, though it's great to deliver a great building, but during operational phase it can get wrong. So how do you measure those KPIs, and what kind of tools do you have to steer that? Because at the end, that's what our end investors, that matters.
And you found those tools.
We're
Still looking for them.
We hope we found them. We're still working on that.
Okay.
But I think the interesting will be to see how they work in practice.
But here I think it's become urgent as well with this ancient building we're in. If you look at it from an energetical point of view, it must be pretty hard, especially now energy is becoming so expensive, to create a building that's interesting for the market, right? Or is that not a problem?
Oh, but we are actually we hedged our energy, so we're okay for a little while. But we're fully in a redevelopment plan to basically take it to energy level A. The only reason we haven't started is because of the pandemic. The municipality and a lot of things were not working at the normal speed. So that's what we're doing. So we are going to redevelop this entire
building. But level A
building.
is probably not enough in the...
a European taxonomy, we now do the buildings with. We're very at the, because it's also a moving target. You see, I don't know if you've seen the taxonomy thing, but that's again a whole different thing than WELL or BREEAM. So it's a moving target in this sense. But we are aiming for the highest for the simple reason that you have no commercial right to exist if you don't. So it's what we're doing.
Aaron, can I ask you a question? Can you hear me? Yes. Well, how do you look at this issue? I mean, it's become more urgent, I think, in the last year or so, but it was urgent, of course, the climate question. How do you deal with that?
Well, first of all, I just want to say that adaptive reuse, when you're using old structures and instead of taking them down, you adapt them, that's the most sustainable thing we can do. Let's just start with that. There's no highly sustainable building that would ever replace an existing building and be equal in, its contribution to the carbon footprint. So we should do more of those. We should all collectively think of how we give new life to existing structures instead of just demoing them. That's number one. Number two, I mean, look, all of our roles together are getting more and more complex. The dynamic between doing the right thing, designing a beautiful building, make it work financially, make it sustainable, make it healthy. It becomes more and more complex to all of us. But here's the good news in my mind. One, that better buildings, more sustainable buildings, are more attractive to a new generation of people. So when you do the right thing, you get promoted financially for renting or selling for more. And this is something we should all keep in mind, that the formula is shifting on both directions. It's not just a price we have to pay in order to be more sustainable. It's also the right thing to do, which attracts our clients. And I think we need to find a way to be reasonable with all the confusing different ambitions, and not be afraid of trying to hit all the points, because whoever tries to hit on all the points loses by definition. And do the best that we can within a budget to improve step by step, each one of our buildings. There's no magic formula that one day will transform our cities. I want to make another comment, if you don't mind, for something that was said.
Yes, and then I'll go back to Harris. Yes, please.
Which it was just said about the public realm and how we can control it, and you talked about specific ideas. So I don't know if it was clear, but I want to sort of make it clear. I've been working with the private sector all of my career. This is what we do. We work with developers to make better neighborhoods. The ground floor program was always a very heavy line item in the Excel sheet of income. So we always programmed the best use for the ground floor in terms of how much income we're going to get. And that led to the vicious cycle that you've described, where we had neighborhoods of artists that were a lot of fun, then came renters and buyers that paid more, and then the Gucci of the world started occupying our ground floor, which is catering only for the 1%. I think we collectively need to understand that if we dedicate the ground floor to not by the income that we're going to generate, but by the fun that we're going to generate, we're going to get paid back on the upper floors big time.
Okay. Thank you for that insight. Harris, let me just get back to you for a few minutes because the end is near. Of this conversation, I'm not talking about the end of the world, which is probably nearer than we think, but that's another thing.
Doomsday is coming.
Let's keep up our hopes. No, Harris, if you look at the user perspective, how important is ecology nowadays? What did you find in your research on that?
It's not conflicting. The social and ecologic, they should not, and they're never conflicted with the economic. So this is something that we repeat as a mantra. And if you ask me
because some people think they do.
I mean, I just completely agree what Aaron just said. So it's possible to create vibrant and valuable and lucrative and ecologically sensed neighborhoods. I mean, it's completely, and this is the task of the 21st century. And I mean, we've been sitting in these UN expert committees on smart, sustainable cities 10 years ago, where they've started formulating these dramatic messages. But now we have to implement it. Now we have to do it. And climate mitigation is almost easier with these micro measures. But what about long-term climate adaptation? And this is something where, and I repeat what I said for the neighborhoods, it does not exist in most countries as a planning instrument. Yeah. So it's not a zoning plan, nor is the regulatory plan, it's something else. And this is, in Germany, luckily the government stepped in for the first phase to fund these innovation projects through the so-called Forum for Sustainability. And this is what enabled us to work in a consortium as an implementation partner together with the University of Hamburg and Stuttgart to work on the city of Mannheim and Halle to co-develop a urban governance toolbox for climate adaptation. So this was when we invented this project, basically. So it's all about this initiative that it comes from us. And also what you mentioned, and I have to reflect on that for energy issues. Europe is going to be in an energy poverty, many parts of Eastern and Western Europe, if the energy bills are going to rise, and they're going to rise. And this gave us another motivation to continue working what we do now in the region of Basel. Basel is a tri-national city. Only 200,000 people live in the core city in Switzerland. The rest lives in Germany or France across the border. So you have 3 different planning systems in one metropolitan area. And Basel started implementing the EBA, which is an experimental regional development instrument. And now we start looking into how can we upscale what you mentioned with EPEA, the cradle-to-cradle concept from the building scale, from reusing parts of the building to upscale it to the neighborhood or the city scale. And this is where we come with the food, water, energy nexus. So how we can decentralize energy production, how we can rethink food production and water flows. And I think this is a very challenging task that we're facing, but I think that's the way to go if we want to, contribute to the energy crisis.
Okay, I think it's time to round up this conversation. And I'd like to thank you all for your contributions. Thank you, Aaron Shen from New York. Thank you very much. Bye-bye and see you next time. I thank our panel members here as well, of course. Galina Permjakova, Bart Meijer and Harris Piplas. And I think we've got to thank Drees Sommer for offering us this opportunity to talk about these interesting topics. And I'll give the floor to Andreas now, please.
Thank you very much, Barry, for the last words. I think it was an interesting discussion. I think a little bit more further would not be a problem. So thank you very much, Galina, for sharing your thoughts. Patricia, Drees Sommer, Patricia is doing together some projects in Germany. Maybe we increase our activities also here in the Netherlands. But thank you very much also to your team from MRP for the guided tour. Special thanks for having us here, and of course, Harris, our colleague from Drees Sommer, sharing our approach on integrated urban solutions, we call it. Thank you very much also for you, Harris. Barry, right questions at the right place. So also, thank you very much to you. We definitely know that you deep into this topic. So definitely thank you all. Then from Drees Sommer, to my team or to our colleagues, to the team that organized it here, Sandra, Isabel, Clara, special thanks, of course, from all of us for the perfect preparation and organization of this event. Last. Most important. And of course, at the end, from Drees Sommer, special thanks to you, all of you here that you joined us here for this discussion. Special thanks also to our digital guests. Hopefully, we transported our fun discussion, fun urban planning, development discussion out of the world, or spread it out of the world. So yes, very. Now the last point is you're all invited to have some drinks, some bites over here for our networking. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.